Welcome to the new normal of Truthside TV. I am Nilantha Ilangamuwa. In 1994, Nelson Mandela has been elected as the first African president of South Africa. Since then, he served for 5 years till 1999. And then South Africa was delivering one of the most interesting legacy on social reformations and social transformations. And what are the lessons to be learned from South African struggle for today's social affairs? We are going to ask and we are going to discuss about these very questions today. My guest today is Her Excellency Robina Marks, High Commissioner of South Africa to Sri Lanka. She is also representing South Africa to Nepal and Bangladesh as well as Maldives. Your Excellency, High Commissioner, welcome to the new normal of Truthside TV.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here with you today.
Tell us about your childhood. I have heard about a couple of stories about childhood, how you spend your life in apartheid South Africa and your mom's role in your life, and tell us a little bit more about it.
That's a really good place to start because of course one's childhood always sets you up in particular ways for how you grow as a person and your own sense of yourself and your community and your country. I was born in Cape Town many years ago, I won't say how many, to a woman who was a domestic worker. We were classified within the broad category of black in South Africa, and being born black in South Africa meant that our opportunities were extremely limited, whether it was access to education, to healthcare, things that you take for granted in Sri Lanka, who you can marry, where you are buried, you know, what places you can go to, and that's of course because of the system of institutionalized racism through the system of apartheid. And so I spent my life very much in poverty, grew up in shacks all across Cape Town. And that is of course what catapulted my involvement in community organizations, in non-governmental organizations, in trade unions. I spent my childhood, you know, just organizing communities to make sure that we develop a strong, united voice against apartheid. And so it is a personal history of activism, as a personal history of course, also very briefly going into exile in Zimbabwe at the time. It's a personal history that includes imprisonment. I was held under what was then called the Internal Security Act, Section 29, in solitary confinement. And all of those experiences shaped my commitment and increased my resolve to make sure that the sacrifices of the millions of people who made our freedom and our democracy possible, that I live those and that I honor those sacrifices. So it's a road that led me to eventually enter into the Foreign Service.
Before we go into that, I would like to know about your time in prison.
It was not difficult at all, but there's a way in which we were all prepared that at some point we would be spending time in prison. I spent a very long time, for example, in safe houses, running from the police, from the security police. And so that was a period of preparation because we knew that the inevitable would happen for many of us. And of course, I was not the only person. There were thousands of young people who were taken into custody by the police.
But was it solitary confinement, or
it was solitary confinement, yes,
Okay.
which meant that I spent my time alone in a cell.
Right.
And I remember that I was allowed 30 minutes of exercise in an empty courtyard once a week. I remember that I wasn't even allowed to go to have a bath without a female warden sitting in the room watching me. And so, and of course, there were several interrogations that involved torture as well. And so that was a very difficult period for me, but it made me stronger as well. And what's important for me about the experience is that when I look back now, I think, you know, it could either have made me bitter or it could have made me better. And it made me better because it helped me to sharpen my resolve, my commitment, to clarify my values. Because if you make that kind of sacrifice, you really have to be clear that this is what you believe in. And so in a very strange and twisted way, the apartheid government did us all a huge favor, because if it wasn't for that experience that I had in common with so many other people who also went into prison, some of them who we were told committed suicide, you know, slipping on a bar of soap in the shower, you know, I would not have we would not have been able to overcome apartheid and so have our new democracy.
One of the main concepts, I would say the most important concept of shaping the African revolution was Ubuntu. So what is this actually? What we could learn from this principle?
Ubuntu is an African term that essentially means a person is a person because of other people. But it's also a word and a meaning that is universal in its approach, because it recognizes our interconnectedness as human beings. It means for us that none of us are able to be anything without joining hands and being with other people. And from that, I think also stems the foundation of South Africa's foreign policy. So Ubuntu is not just something that is a way of life for us as a country, as a people. It also has a universal application, because it's a value that I think that that all countries across the world can indeed embrace, because it recognizes our interconnectedness, and it says that as countries we need each other. As countries, and of course we do come together through the United Nations system. And I think it's important for us to, particularly now that we are entering into a post-COVID period, you know, that has decimated the economy of so many countries, it's more important than ever that we don't retreat back into our individual corners, but that we reach out to each other and begin to think about what are the opportunities that we have, you know, for our trade between our different countries. And so Ubuntu starts from the heart. It says that I see you. And when I say I see you, it means I see the social conditions within which you live. I see your struggles, I see your aspirations, and I am here to say that let's help each other. You know, let us support each other in friendship and in solidarity with each other.
Your Excellency, in one of your interviews, you have talked about how your life, your anger transformed into an opportunity. This is significant, I believe. Most of the social activists, most of people who are involved in these social reforms require such a deep understanding. Actually, how did you transform yourself and your anger due to the apartheid South Africa into an opportunity?
I think that I can summarize it best by quoting something that Nelson Mandela said. He said that resentment is like swallowing a poison and then expecting your enemy to die from it. I was very clear that I could either be consumed by the corrosive anger that sat within me and within many others, or I could turn that anger into an angle, into a strategy that would help me to clarify and refine even further the contribution that I wanted to make. And so we all have that choice, you know. We can see and find the transformatory potential within anger, within a terrible experience, and emerge from that stronger and clearer and more committed, or that anger can and that resentment can corrode us from the inside and eat away at us and also paralyze us. I didn't want to be paralyzed. I wanted to be empowered by that experience.
And then you joined the foreign service in South Africa. And before that, I just wanted to ask you, how did you meet Nelson Mandela? And then what was your first interact with him and his core group? And then what are the main lessons that you have learned out of it?
Yes. It's an interesting memory to recall, you know, the time when I met Nelson Mandela, because you must remember that this is a man who had been in prison for 27 years. We did not know what he looked like. We had pictures of him that was taken way back in 1963 when he was imprisoned, which incidentally is also, I should admit, it was the year in which I was born. And so for 27 years of my life, the formative years of my life, it was overshadowed by the fact that this father of our nation and our leader was in prison. And so eventually when he was released, and I met him soon after that, I must admit that usually I'm very articulate, but I was completely dumbstruck to speak in front of this great man. But it was such an amazing experience because I found him to be humble and very unassuming in character. He was a very tall man, over 6 foot, but he had this quality, even though he had this enormous presence, physical presence, but he also had this quality of treating you as someone who's an equal. And so I spent, there were a few subsequent meetings with him as well. And he always gave us really excellent advice and guidance on our respective areas of work. And so I remember someone who was clear, who was principled, someone who would not compromise, someone who was proud, but proud in the sense that he wasn't arrogant, and someone who really for me embodied servant leadership. He embodied what it meant to be servant leadership, because so many leaders develop an ego, you know, and they become bigger than the people that they represent. And he taught me about the importance of humility, you know, that whatever we achieve in life, whatever we are in life, is always a reflection of, and must always reflect the values and the type of country that we want to build. One that is built on humility and not arrogance, one that is built on assertiveness without trying to take over and dictate for others how they should think and be. And so, so for me, it was a father in the absence of a father in my own life. And he reminded me of what type of leader, of servant leader I wanted to be.
Let's talk about Mandela's legacy. Mandela was not a lonely fighter. He has millions of people. People were taking care of his visions, and then they were moved forward with his principles. And who are the other leaders who fought along with Mandela?
You know, it's a very good question, because often people focus only on Nelson Mandela. And of course, he deserves focus because he was a very special embodiment of servant leadership within our country. But he was joined by so many other women and men who were part of our leadership within exile. There were women, for example, like Ruth First, who was active in exile, a white woman who was active in exile in Mozambique. And she received a parcel bomb that was sent by the security police, which exploded and which killed her. But she was part of our leadership. There were women like Ruth Mompati, who also served in exile. There were women like Dulce September, who served in France and who was assassinated in France as well. And so, and of course, there were men like Awar Tambo, and Oliver Reginald Tambo is also what our largest airport is named for today. He is someone that, with Nelson Mandela, of course, way back in the 60s, the two of them were our first trained black lawyers, and they opened up the first firm for lawyers in South Africa. And so for us, we always say that we stand on the shoulders of giants, not one giant, of many giants, but in many ways, the leadership and the qualities of Nelson Mandela captured the imagination of so many of us, you know. And so today, I think he stands as a beacon of hope for people across the world who yearn for freedom, who yearn to break free from poverty. And so for us, we never saw ourselves as an island, you know, as a small country on its own. We always looked for ways in which we could support other countries.
Right.
And so the fact that he was able to transcend the national boundaries of the struggles in South Africa, and that we could also reach out to other countries and remind them of the life and the legacy of Nelson Mandela and what it is that he was trying to teach the world. You know, the fact that we, you know, non-discrimination, non-sexism, non-racism, all of those qualities that I think still makes him one of the leaders in the world that we look at. And one, of course, you mentioned is 102, he would have been 102 years old this year. And of course, we know that Nelson Mandela is the only leader in the world that the United Nations have given the honor of a dedicated day. You know, no one else have been given that particular honor and privilege. And so with Mandela Day coming up on the 18th of July, we are particularly proud that the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, have chosen to give a very special address on the life and legacy of Nelson Mandela to all the member states of the United Nations, to remind the world again that this is someone whose legacy we must emulate, that this is someone who is a prime example of what it means to be a servant leader, and this is someone whose qualities is also accessible for everyone. I think that one of the enduring lessons of Nelson Mandela is that he reminds us that all of us can be heroes for our community, within our families, and for our country as well. You know, that there is no such thing as, he taught, in fact, he was very much against the notion of exceptionalism, you know. And when people try to say to him, you know, when people try to liken him to being a saint, you know, he was very scornful of being put on a pedestal, and he said that a saint is just a sinner who keeps on trying. And so he reminds us that whatever flaws we have, because we are all imperfect human beings, we always need to look at ways in which we can transcend those flaws and become a hero, whether it is for school children, you know, when they see other children being bullied and speaking up for them, whether we live in a community who's affected by landslides, you know, during terrible weather, for example, and saying that this is something that should not happen. We should care for the environment. You know, whether it's someone who's in prison somewhere, to whom Nelson Mandela is a source of hope and inspiration. Every single one of us can be a hero and can make a difference. And that is what is important for all of us to remember.
But now many critics say that Mandela's legacy has been betrayed, and especially the leaders who were elected after President Mandela's were not up to his principles. And they said even the Mandela's foundations issued a statement saying that his principles has been systematically looting. Do you have any response to make?
Absolutely, yes. Thank you for asking that question. You know, we come from a long history of struggling against apartheid, and also developing our thoughts and our ideas of what our country would be like once we were liberated.
Right.
That's the first point. The second point is that South Africans are extremely hard on themselves. You know, we are very good at beating ourselves up, you know. And there's something that I quite like about the fact that even the Nelson Mandela Foundation, that we live in a democracy where even the Nelson Mandela Foundations and any other civil society actor is able to speak up and say we are not happy with the direction in which some people are taking the country.
Right.
We live in a very noisy democracy. It's a noisy democracy because we encourage people to criticize.
Right.
It's a vibrant democracy. It's a democracy that does not seek to silence dissenting voices. And so I would prefer to live in a country, you know, where that is a noisy democracy, where people can criticize. Of course, no society is perfect. You know, corruption is not peculiar
Right.
to a black government or to a white government. It's not peculiar to a government in the West, in Europe, or in Africa. But there's a particular way, I think, in which when it does happen in a country like South Africa, where there were such high expectations, you know, where there is a sense of disappointment, because for some reason we expected our society to be perfect, you know. Antonio Gramsci, who's an Italian intellectual, said that part of the struggle that we have is that we are trying to give birth to the new in the womb of the old.
Right.
And so a lot of the violence of apartheid, a lot of the greed of apartheid, a lot of the prejudice of apartheid, you know, still lives within many of us. You know, I'm not saying that apartheid is to blame for people acting in ways that are corrupt,
Right.
but I am saying that the seeds for that was laid way back when we had so little. And I think it's also important to remember that that we have a system of compromise within our country. Our ideas for South Africa was quite socialist in nature, you know, very much like Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
You know, we had a vision of an egalitarian society, but at the same time, we had to be pragmatic about the choices that we made. So we are a market economy, but we are also a skewed market economy that still reflects the vestiges of apartheid. Because in our country today, you must remember that we did not nationalize anything within the country. And so capital still sits in the hands of mostly white people.
Right.
You know, 90% of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, for example, you know, is run by companies that are white owned,
Yep.
you know, by white men. at the end of apartheid, we black people were living on 13% of the land. The rest were all owned by white people. And we didn't take away the land. We didn't take people's money away from them. And so what you have now is that many white people have inherited privilege. You might find a few people black people who are rich,
Right.
but you have a lot of white people who have wealth. And there's a huge difference between being wealthy and being rich.
Yeah.
Because wealth sits in what you own, in shares that you inherited from your parents, in land, in property, etc., etc. And so this is part of what it is that we have to do away with,
Right.
We have to create a more equal society. We have to make sure that that the inherited privilege, white privilege that we inherited, in 1994, that doesn't further lead to a deepening and an entrenching of
Right.
poverty.
Your Excellency, I would like to know about what are the potentials that we have remain and we have to develop in the coming few years.
I think that the one thing that we have to realize is that the future of the world's economy lies in our two continents, in Asia and in Africa. We both have huge populations who's hungry for new goods and services. Our solidarity with Sri Lanka in particular goes back to the Bandung Conference in the 1960s, where we said that we wanted to forge unity between our two countries. And I also think that it is something that is very much encapsulated in the fact that we both come from a colonized background, where colonization have caused deep colonial trauma to us, but has also turned us into countries that are developing,
Right.
and we have to ask, why are we still, why we still have that status.
Yeah.
I think it's extremely important that we see the potential within Africa, and that we recognize, and of course at the same time we recognize that that at the moment South Africa is Sri Lanka's largest trading partner within the continent, and so our trade footprint has grown. It is positively in South Africa's favor at the moment, which is not sustainable, because I think that we need to go for more equal trade balance between the two countries. And so we encourage more Sri Lankan business people to look for opportunities. But having said that, we are quite concerned about the post-COVID economic recovery period. We have to make sure that our trade supply lines are kept open. And more importantly, we need to look for new opportunities for trade. And so, for example, I would think that something like health diplomacy is something that we have to sharpen. The Ayurvedic treatments that you have in South Africa, in Sri Lanka, is something that we might want to see what is the potential within that to build up the immune system of our country. I must confess that I now also regularly take turmeric,
Right.
and I was quite worried recently when turmeric was running out, because I thought, how will I protect my system? And so I think that we need to look at new opportunities for us. South Africa is open for business, so is Sri Lanka. Now is not the time to retreat into our corners. We cannot, and we have to live the principle of Ubuntu, that a country is a country because of other countries. We have to come
Great.
together in friendship and solidarity.
Your Excellency Robina Marks, the High Commissioner of South Africa to Sri Lanka, it is an honor to have you on our show, The New Normal of Truthside TV. Thank you so much, and we wish you all the best for your next appointment. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.